Welcome, friends. It's 8 p.m. and I'm making my husband put the kids to sleep tonight because I'm packing up for a trip tomorrow. And before I can really settle down for a long winter's nap, I need to spend some time heading down that long, winding rabbit's hole, unearthing more information in my never-ending quest to hear what friends and family have to say about the Duggars behind the scenes. A few days ago, I made a video about a podcast called I Pray You Put This Journal Away. The creator of the podcast is a former friend of Josh Duggar and his brothers. He attended their church during a period of time that the Duggars were dealing with the initial fallout from Josh having SM'd 4 of his sisters. Even though Justin is not fully aware about what's going on with the sisters at the time that he reads us his journals, he does watch Josh getting punished and being held up as an example in front of his entire church. Before Justin ever made his podcast, he did an Ask Me Anything on the Reddit page Duggar's Snark. In this video, we will be reviewing some of the questions and answers from that session. Justin's bio on Reddit reads like this. I'm slightly younger than Josh and was friends with him during our teen years. I recently did a Reddit post about the experience and was invited to answer your questions here. My goal is just to raise awareness of the realities of irresponsibility TLC-style shows, celebrity culture, and maybe shine a light on the damage caused by fundamentalist religious culture. Ask away. Question 1. Were you there when Josh confessed his sins to the church body? Response. Sort of. He didn't confess the molestation to the general church body, as far as I'm aware. He did confess to the elders, men of the church. The things that he confessed to the general body were kind of generalized, like lust, sin. The adults knew more than I did, for sure. Question. Was it obvious that the siblings raised each other? Did Jim Bob and Michelle seem kind of absent towards their kids? I'm curious about how the realities of their family dynamic. Response. Yes, it was pretty obvious that the children raised each other. I would specifically say the older girls were the quote-unquote mini-moms of the kids. Jim Bob felt more absent to me than Michelle, who I always thought was just really busy and overwhelmed, while Jim Bob was kind of just hanging out at auctions, stocking his warehouse, and doing cool projects with the older boys. Question. More of a general question. I know what the girls are taught from a young age, to be modest, don't cause a man to stumble, but what are boys taught and at what ages? Is it a treat women how you want situation, or just a behavioral learn thing, like this is how my dad acted, so it must be okay? Response. A lot of the perspectives are definitely taught purposefully. There is a lot of putting women on pedestals, not really in a human way, but as sort of an object, like a flower or a jewel. There's a lot of ownership perspective towards wives and daughters, like they're yours. I think I could have been raised in a pea studio lot and had a lot less focus on women's bodies and sexuality. It was obsessive, relentless. I never heard anyone say, treat women how you want. That was just sort of a natural byproduct. A lot of things like hitting or beating kids in general or abusing, like Josh did, were technically wrong and discussed as sins, but they weren't treated as unexpected or unusual or too far. It was kind of a bunch of dudes gathered around, patting each other on the back. In my opinion, this is one of the more interesting question and answers in this AMA, and Justin does do a really good job of addressing more of this within his podcast. I pray you put the journal away. For now, I'm just going to read you the question and answer as it was presented on Reddit. Question. In your former post, you mentioned that Josh was punished by having his head shaved, forbidden to talk, and having to dig a neighbor's pond. But when the TLC cameras were around, he was brought back and everyone pretended everything was normal. Did you notice any other examples where real life for the Duggars was so different from the reality they presented on the show? Did Josh, and the other kids as well if you knew them, did their personalities match up to how it was portrayed on screen? Response. I didn't watch the show enough to really be able to highlight the differences. The show generally struck me as weird and staged feeling. I am sure if I watched some episodes from when I knew them, I'd think it was pretty bogus. I don't know of too many things that were on the level of the pond digging thing, probably because I mostly stayed away from the show. Josh showed me some clips of himself, and I thought they were bogus. At the same time, I never had that vibe with Jill or John David or Jana or Jessa or Ginger. They seemed pretty consistent. I would probably hug each of them if I saw them today. Jim Bob can't act to save his life, so I'd be surprised if he fooled anyone with the fake persona. Michelle is definitely sing-songy in real life, and she's also more of a human being who's tired and stressed and exasperated and sometimes scary. I got scolded by her in the past, and it was kind of intense. I heard her lose her voice. Overall, Jim Bob and Michelle were pretty controlling. I sometimes saw clips of them doing these casual whole family activities in the show, and it was pretty fake. I rarely saw them all pile into 4 cars and just go out for random ice cream, unless it was staged. To me, the real Duggar show was at church and at home. It was gritty and emotionally exhausting. It had quiet, beautiful moments. It was painful. It had vivid pictures of abuse. It had beautiful, innocent children contrasted with control and harm and charades. It had ghost stories about the outside world, delusions of saving the world, masked greed and contorted motives. It had human beings who did bad things, not just simple monsters. Honestly, someone should make a movie about it because it's kind of insane. I just find that to be one of the most interesting responses I've seen in any of the AMAs about the Duggars, and Justin did a really good job writing that up for us. It's sad. In this response, Justin refers to the fact that he has presented in his podcast that part of Josh's punishment for quote-unquote being lustful and sinning was to have to dig out a pond in someone's yard. Who he was staying with an older man, and he was supposed to dig out the mud from the pond. And the purpose of it was to show him that once you put something clean into the water, it can be really hard or impossible to get it out, and that would be the same thing as what's going to happen to his soul if he continues down a path of sinning. Next question. Reading your replies, it seems like Josh was a fairly guarded, secretive person. Speculating, of course, do you think he was this way due to fear of his parents? Response, I think that was certainly a factor. Question, what were interactions like among his family? Did things ever seem tense and uncontrollable between Josh and his siblings, particularly his sisters? Response, yes, they did seem tense. When I learned about his abusive actions, I remembered a lot of standoffishness from his sisters, and that made sense. Jim Bob and the men in the church were always pretty supportive of him. I remember Josh getting calls and advice and support from celebrity conservatives like Bill Gothard and Ray Comfort, etc. during the time. And then he does edit and say, I can't exactly remember if Ray Comfort called Josh. Next question, is he truly the family golden child, or is that just a perception? Response, I would say so. He was very supported by Jim Bob and the men of the church especially. He was smart and a good talker, and I think they encouraged him to pursue his political aspirations, even after his abusive actions were known, and were insanely accommodating of his behavior. Next question. Did Josh stand out as particularly slimy, sketchy, or were a lot of the guys in that circle similar? Response. Josh stood out, but there were definitely a lot of guys parading around sort of being like little patriarchs in training. Josh seemed more broken, lonely, disturbed inside than a lot of the typical slimy types his age, who I kind of saw as garden variety a-holes. Maybe that's just because I didn't get to know a lot of them. There were really nice, sweet young boys too. Some of them were roughed up in order to kind of get them to fit the alpha Bible jerk mold. Next question. The degree to which Anna is an enabler versus a victim herself is much debated on this subreddit. What is your perspective on this? How much do you think Anna knew and understood about the molestations before marriage? Response: I think Anna knew what Josh did before they were married. It wouldn't make sense for him not to confess, since the whole church and Josh's entire family knew what he'd done at that point. At this point, Anna's behavior is shameful and enabling, since she's risking not only her own well-being but her children's. I sometimes find that abusers, enablers, victims can all be the same person. Question: was there a noticeable difference between how Josh was treated and the way his younger brothers were treated? Response: I'm not sure if any of the others have similar stuff going on as Josh and had the same level of secrecy support. That wasn't the case when I knew them, but it could have changed. Most of the boys younger than John, David, Josh were pretty young. Question: I'm just genuinely curious about what you liked about Josh. We've seen him behave like such a creep on television, but I imagine he had to have some positive qualities that drew you to him in the first place. Is he charismatic? Response: one-on-one, Josh was a little quieter and more reflective than on TV or in front of a crowd. We shared some similar interests, and in our cloistered environments, I think we enjoyed having people to talk to who enjoyed the same things. I bristled a little at the mask he put on, but I got along with what I thought was his more authentic self. That was, of course, before learning about the monstrous actions. And this will be the last question and answer that I'll go over. I have found this one really interesting. I always keep it in the back of my mind. And if you want to see any more questions or answers from this participant, Justin from I Pray You Put This Journal Away, you can check him out on the Duggar Snark Reddit page. Question: do you know anything about his relationship with John David? Myself and others have found it strange that the two older brothers in an elite fundy family like themselves seem to have no relationship. Has there ever been an indication that JD dislikes Josh? Response: granted, I haven't kept in touch, but I've always liked John David and thought he was a genuine, gentle person. The disclaimer is that I don't know him as an adult. Yes, I felt like there was tension. I don't think John David had a very high view of Josh, and I wouldn't be surprised if that rift grew over time. Free trivia that I imagine you guys would like. I saw Josh and John David fight once, like a real fight. John David held his own pretty well. When he gets mad, he turns into the Wolverine. So I really found Justin's question and answer session on the Reddit Duggar Snark page extremely interesting. It gave me a new and different look behind the scenes of what was going on in the Duggar family during the time that the molestations were taking place with the older girls. If you are still interested in learning more, there are plenty more question and answers on the Reddit thread. You can go to Reddit and look for Duggar Snark, and also check out Justin's podcast, I Pray You Put This Journal Away. Also, check out my video highlighting what Justin had to say about the Duggars in I Pray You Put This Journal Away. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Were you surprised at all by what Justin had to say about his time with the Duggars Church? I read all of your comments and reply back as much as possible. Tell me about your own Duggar experience and what I've gotten right or wrong with my opinions in this video. I can't wait to read your comments below. Now I'm off to read some interesting articles, watch some new commentary, pack up my bags, and head even further down the rabbit hole before I finally fall asleep. Good night, friends.